So, you're prepping for a React interview, right? You know there are those questions that are just guaranteed to come up. But here's the thing. It's not about memorizing the answers. It's about really getting the core ideas. In this explainer, we're going to break down those foundational concepts so you can walk into that interview feeling like you actually own the material.
All right, let's start with the classic opener, the one you're almost certain to get. What is React? I know it sounds simple, but man, your answer here really sets the tone for the entire interview. It's your first chance to show them you truly get the big picture.
So at its core, React is a JavaScript library, originally from Meta, and it's built for one main reason: building user interfaces. It's the magic behind those super fast, dynamic websites, where stuff updates on the screen without the whole page having to refresh. And it focuses only on the view layer, the part the user actually sees and interacts with.
The best way to understand the whole philosophy of React is to think of it like building with Legos. Seriously, your entire application is just made up of these small reusable pieces called components. A button, that's a component. A search bar, a user profile. Each one is its own little self-contained Lego block. You build them once, and then you can just snap them together anywhere you need them. That's the secret to keeping your code organized and easy to scale.
Okay, so what makes React feel so snappy and fast? Well, it all comes down to avoiding the huge performance killer, the browser's DOM. Changing the real DOM directly is super slow and inefficient. So, React has this incredibly clever workaround called the virtual DOM. Think of it like a lightweight copy that just lives in memory. When some data changes in your app, React first updates this virtual copy. Then, it compares the new version to the old one, a process called diffing, and it figures out the absolute minimum number of changes it needs to make to the real DOM. It's like surgical precision, and that's why React apps feel so incredibly responsive.
But let's be real. No tool is perfect for every single job. A big sign of a senior developer isn't just knowing how to use a tool, but when to use it. So let's dive into the trade-offs, the pros and cons of using React.
On the plus side, the advantages are pretty obvious. You get that amazing speed from the virtual DOM, you get clean, reusable components, and it's all backed by a massive community. But the limitation, well, React is just a view library. If you need things like routing or really complex state management, you gotta pull in other tools. And honestly, if you're just building a simple static website, using React is total overkill. It's like using a sledgehammer to crack a nut.
This race car analogy it hits the nail on the head. A race car is an incredible piece of engineering, but you wouldn't use it to pop down to the grocery store, right? It's powerful, but it takes real skill to handle it. React is exactly the same. It's immensely powerful, but that power comes with a learning curve, and you have to know you're using it in the right context.
All right, let's get into what is probably one of the biggest game changers in the history of React: hooks. If you've touched modern React at all, you've definitely used them, but really understanding why they came to be is so important.
So what the heck are they? Well, to put it simply, hooks are just special functions. They let you hook into core React features, like state and lifecycle methods, from right inside your simple functional components. Before they were introduced back in version 16.8, you just couldn't do this. You were basically forced to use these more complex, clunky class components.
And this before and after view, wow, it really tells the whole story. Before hooks, if your component needed its own memory, its own state, you had to write a class. And that meant more code, more boilerplate, and some pretty confusing syntax. After hooks, simple functions could suddenly do everything the classes could. The result? Our code got dramatically cleaner and just so much easier to read.
Now, there are a bunch of built-in hooks, and each one has a specific job. The two you are going to see and use constantly are useState for managing a component's memory and uEffect for handling side effects, like fetching data from an API. Then you've got more specialized tools like useContext for sharing data easily and useMemo for fine-tuning performance. Altogether, they're what give functional components their superpowers.
Okay, let's zoom in on the most fundamental, the most common hook of them all, useState. This is the one you will use in pretty much every single component you ever build. It's the absolute bread and butter.
So useState is the hook that gives a component its memory. It's how a component can remember things like how many times a button has been clicked or what a user has typed into an input field. Without state, your UI would just be a static picture, completely lifeless.
Let's just break down the syntax real quick, because it's actually super simple. When you call useState, you give it an initial value, in this case the number 0. And what it gives you back is an array with two things in it. The first thing is the current value of your state. We've called it count. The second thing is a function that lets you update that value. We've called that setCount. And here's the magic. Whenever you call setCount with a new value, React just automatically re-renders the component to show that new value on the screen.
A really great way to think about this is like a box. The state variable, our count, is whatever is currently inside the box. The function, setCount, is like your hand that can reach into that box and swap out the contents. And every single time you do that, React automatically updates the display for you to show what's new. It's that simple.
Okay, so let's pull it all together. What have we learned? 1. React builds fast user interfaces with reusable components. 2. Its incredible speed comes from that clever virtual DOM. 3. Hooks are what bring all the modern power to simple functions. And 4. useState is the absolute key to unlocking dynamic, interactive experiences for your users.
And that brings us to the final, and I think the most important question. Answering all this stuff in an interview isn't really about just reciting syntax or definitions. It's about showing that you understand the principles, the why behind the code. Why do we use components? Why is the virtual DOM so fast? Why were hooks even created in the first place? Grasping that is what truly separates a good developer from a great one.